Have you ever felt that strange moment when the person who once cared so deeply suddenly begins to treat you like you matter less, and you find yourself wondering what you did wrong? It is a quiet kind of pain, not always loud, not always dramatic, but it slowly enters your mind and stays there. You start thinking more than usual. You replay conversations. You analyze small changes in tone, in attention, in effort. Something inside you feels the shift before you can even explain it. And here is the difficult truth many people do not say out loud. Almost every woman experiences this moment at some point in her life. A moment where her heart senses distance before her mind fully understands it. And when that moment arrives, the first instinct is almost always the same. You want answers. You want clarity. You want to understand what changed. So you begin trying harder. You ask questions. You try to communicate more. You try to be patient. You try to fix what feels broken. Because deep inside, you believe love should be protected. You believe that if something is slipping away, effort will bring it back. And that belief comes from a beautiful place in the human heart. But sometimes, the very reaction that feels most natural is the one that quietly weakens your position. Human psychology is strange in this way. When someone knows exactly how you will respond, they stop being careful with your emotions. Predictability creates comfort, and comfort, when mixed with low accountability, slowly turns into carelessness. Think about this carefully. When a person hurts you and immediately expects you to chase them for answers, they already know the outcome. They already know the emotional script. They expect the long messages. They expect the explanations. They expect the emotional conversations that go in circles. They expect you to stay invested no matter what they do. And when someone feels that level of emotional certainty, something subtle begins to change inside their behavior. The fear of losing you becomes smaller. The urgency to protect your feelings becomes weaker, not always because they are cruel, sometimes simply because human nature tends to value what feels uncertain more than what feels guaranteed. This is why so many people find themselves stuck in painful emotional cycles. The more hurt they feel, the more they try to repair the connection. The more they try to repair it, the more predictable their reactions become. And the more predictable those reactions are, the more control the other person quietly gains over the emotional dynamic. It is a pattern that repeats itself in countless relationships. One person begins withdrawing effort. The other person responds by increasing effort. One becomes distant. The other becomes more understanding. One becomes less attentive. The other becomes more patient. And slowly, without realizing it, the emotional balance starts shifting in the wrong direction. But something interesting happens the moment that pattern breaks, the moment your reaction stops following the script that someone expects. Because the human mind is extremely sensitive to disrupted patterns. When people cannot predict your behavior anymore, their attention suddenly becomes sharper, their curiosity increases, their sense of control weakens, and the emotional dynamic begins to shift in a way that surprises them. Most people think power in relationships comes from louder reactions, stronger words, longer explanations. But psychology shows something very different. Real emotional influence often comes from calm unpredictability, from the quiet strength of someone who refuses to react the way they are expected to react. And this is exactly what many people never learn. They believe the solution to emotional distance is emotional pursuit. But sometimes the most powerful response is not chasing clarity, it is creating confusion. Not confusion through games or manipulation, but confusion through self-respect, through emotional discipline, through the quiet decision to step out of the predictable role that someone expects you to play. Because when someone hurts you, and instead of collapsing emotionally, you respond with calm control, something begins to happen inside their mind. They start asking questions they never asked before. Why is she so calm? Why is she not reacting like before? Why does she seem different now? And that mental shift is the beginning of something powerful. It interrupts the comfort they once had with hurting you. It introduces uncertainty into a situation where they once felt completely secure, and humans are deeply uncomfortable with uncertainty. The mind naturally tries to solve what it cannot easily explain. That is why the response you choose when someone hurts you can either strengthen your emotional position or slowly weaken it. The reaction that feels strongest in the moment is not always the reaction that protects your value in the long run. And this is where a deeper understanding of human psychology becomes life-changing. Because once you understand how emotional patterns influence respect, attention, and attraction, you begin to move differently. You stop reacting from pure emotion. You start responding with awareness. And the shift that happens after that is something many people never expect. If you stay until the end, you will discover the psychological principle that quietly turns emotional pain into emotional strength. And why the reaction most people think is weak is actually the one that leaves the strongest and most unforgettable impression. What usually happens after that painful realization? Most people move toward the person who caused the pain instead of stepping away from it. The heart begins searching for explanations. The mind starts building arguments that might fix the distance. You tell yourself that if you just say the right words, if you just explain your feelings clearly enough, something will suddenly change. But the truth about human behavior is uncomfortable. When someone sees that their actions still receive your attention, your energy, and your emotional investment, they rarely feel pressure to change. Attention is powerful currency. Every message, every emotional reaction, every attempt to repair the situation sends a quiet signal that your presence is still guaranteed. And when a person believes you are guaranteed, they stop protecting the connection with the same care they once had. People often misunderstand respect in relationships. Respect is not created by how much love you show. Respect grows from the way you protect your own emotional boundaries. When someone begins treating you carelessly and nothing about your behavior changes, the situation teaches them a silent lesson. It tells them that the relationship will continue even when effort disappears. Over time, this becomes the new emotional environment. One person gives more and more understanding. The other becomes more comfortable giving less and less in return. This is not always intentional cruelty. Many times, it is simply the human tendency to adapt to what feels safe and predictable. Think about the psychology behind curiosity. The mind becomes alert when something familiar suddenly behaves differently. Imagine hearing the same sound every day for months. After a while, you stop noticing it. But if that sound suddenly stops, your attention immediately wakes up. Your brain starts asking questions. What changed? Why is it different today? Human relationships follow the same pattern. When someone becomes used to a predictable emotional response, they stop examining their behavior carefully. But when the pattern breaks, awareness returns. This is why emotional control can quietly change the entire dynamic between two people. When hurt appears and you refuse to react in the expected way, the situation begins shifting inside the other person's mind. The reaction they prepared for never arrives. The emotional script they assumed would play out suddenly disappears. And when that happens, their sense of certainty weakens. Certainty is what allows careless behavior to continue comfortably. Remove certainty, and the mind begins to pay attention again. Many people think strength in emotional situations means proving how deeply they care. They believe explaining their pain will awaken compassion. Sometimes that happens, but very often it does not. Sometimes constant explanations only make the situation easier for the other person. They know you will stay. They know you will keep trying. They know that no matter how distant they become, your emotional effort will continue filling the space they leave behind. Slowly, without noticing it, you become the only one protecting the relationship. But when emotional discipline enters the picture, everything feels different. Imagine the moment when someone expects frustration, but instead meets calm distance. Imagine the moment when someone assumes you will fight for attention, yet you quietly turn your energy toward your own life. This shift is powerful because it interrupts comfort. The person who once felt secure in your predictable reactions suddenly encounters something unfamiliar. They no longer know what you are thinking. They no longer feel sure about your next move. And uncertainty awakens a level of attention that comfort never creates. The human mind is deeply attracted to what it cannot easily understand. Questions create tension inside our thoughts. When answers are not immediately available, curiosity grows stronger. That is why emotional unpredictability often carries more influence than emotional pursuit. It creates space where reflection can happen. The other person begins wondering about your silence, your calmness, your focus on yourself. They start observing changes that once felt impossible. This does not mean pretending not to care. It does not mean playing games with emotions. Real emotional strength is not manipulation. It is self-respect expressed through quiet behavior. When someone hurts you and your response is grounded instead of desperate, You send a message without speaking many words. The message is simple but powerful. Your emotional well-being matters. Your time matters. Your presence is not something that can be taken for granted. This shift often surprises people who have spent their lives reacting from pure feeling. At first, it feels unnatural. The heart wants to explain everything. The mind wants immediate closure. But patience allows something important to happen. It allows the other person to experience the absence of the reaction they expected. And that absence becomes a mirror. It reflects their behavior back to them in a way that words never could. When someone suddenly realizes that the emotional environment has changed, they begin reassessing the situation. They think about the connection differently. They look more closely at what might be slipping away. Sometimes this awareness brings renewed effort. Sometimes it reveals the truth about their intentions. Either way, the dynamic becomes clearer because you are no longer chasing clarity through emotional pressure. What makes this approach powerful is that it shifts your focus away from controlling someone else's behavior. Instead, it strengthens control over your own reactions. When your emotional center becomes stable, other people's actions lose the ability to completely disturb your peace. You stop trying to force outcomes. You begin protecting your dignity first. And when dignity becomes your foundation, something remarkable happens. Your presence begins to carry quiet weight. The way you move, the way you respond, the way you hold your emotional ground all start communicating value without needing constant explanation. That is the moment where confusion begins forming inside the mind of the person who once felt comfortable hurting you. They expected emotional chaos. They expected pursuit. Instead, they encounter calm distance and quiet confidence. And that unfamiliar response plants a powerful question in their thoughts, a question that continues growing the longer your strength remains steady. That question begins to grow quietly inside his mind. Something feels different, and he cannot easily explain why. The emotional environment he once understood no longer behaves the same way. The reaction he expected never appeared, and now his thoughts start moving in directions he did not plan. This is where a powerful shift in human behavior often begins. When the mind meets uncertainty, it naturally searches for answers. Silence creates space for reflection. Distance creates awareness, and awareness forces people to look at their own actions in a way they avoided before. When someone becomes used to having emotional control in a relationship, they stop questioning their behavior carefully. Everything feels stable from their side. They assume things will continue exactly as they are. They assume that no matter what they do, the other person will remain emotionally available. That sense of emotional security allows careless habits to grow slowly. But once that comfort disappears, the mind becomes alert again. Suddenly, small changes begin to matter. The absence of your usual reaction becomes noticeable. Your calmness becomes unusual. Your focus on yourself becomes something he cannot easily ignore. This is one of the most interesting parts of human psychology. People often notice your value only when your behavior stops revolving around them. When someone sees you constantly trying to maintain the connection, they stop examining their own effort. They feel safe. They feel certain that the relationship will remain stable no matter how little attention they give in return. But when your energy shifts away from chasing their validation, the emotional balance changes in a quiet but powerful way. Now he begins observing you more closely. Not because you demanded attention, but because the familiar pattern disappeared. He remembers how you used to react. He remembers the conversations, the emotional explanations, the effort you once placed into repairing every distance. But now something else stands in its place. Your presence feels calmer. Your focus seems directed toward your own life. You no longer appear trapped inside the emotional storm that once surrounded the connection. And that difference creates curiosity. Curiosity is a powerful force inside the human mind. When people cannot understand a change, they begin paying attention again. They start looking for signs. They try to interpret your behavior. They wonder what caused the shift. They wonder if something important is happening beyond their view. And the more they wonder, the more their attention slowly returns toward you. But the real strength of this moment is not the confusion it creates inside someone else. The real strength is the transformation happening inside you. Instead of reacting from emotional pain, you begin moving from emotional awareness. Instead of trying to control how someone treats you, you start protecting your own inner stability. This is a profound change because it shifts your focus from external validation to internal strength. When people learn to center their emotional energy around self-respect, something remarkable begins to happen. Their reactions become calmer. Their decisions become clearer. They stop trying to earn basic care from others. They stop negotiating for attention that should have been natural in the first place. And when that shift takes place, their presence begins to feel different to everyone around them. Confidence built on self-respect does not shout for attention. It moves quietly. It shows itself through patience, composure, and emotional balance. When someone sees this kind of strength, it creates a powerful impression because it cannot be easily manipulated. People sense that the person standing in front of them is no longer driven by fear of losing the relationship. Instead, they are guided by respect for their own emotional peace. This is where confusion inside his mind slowly turns into reflection. He starts reconsidering moments he ignored before. He begins replaying conversations. He notices how different your behavior feels compared to the past. The emotional certainty he once relied on begins fading. And when certainty disappears, people often become more careful with their actions. But even more important than his thoughts is what happens inside your own mind during this process. For the first time, your emotional state is no longer controlled by how someone else behaves. Your mood does not depend on whether he gives attention today or tomorrow. Your sense of worth no longer waits for someone else to confirm it. That independence creates a new kind of peace, a peace that many people spend years trying to discover. And once you experience that peace, something surprising happens. The urge to chase explanations becomes weaker. The desire to constantly repair the connection fades. Instead, you begin observing the relationship with clearer vision. You start recognizing patterns that were once hidden by emotion. You see the difference between genuine care and temporary attention. You understand the difference between real effort and empty promises. This awareness is powerful because it places you back in control of your emotional direction. You are no longer reacting automatically to every shift in someone else's behavior. You are choosing how to respond based on your own standards. And that choice changes everything about the way others experience your presence. The person who once felt comfortable hurting you now stands in front of a completely different emotional energy. Instead of desperation, he sees calm strength. Instead of constant explanations, he encounters quiet distance. Instead of emotional pursuit, he witnesses someone who has learned to protect their own dignity. And that unexpected transformation forces him to see the situation through a completely new lens.